Hi everyone, I'm live. Okay, let's see if I can share my screen properly and get the show on the road. Okay, so my name is Limpho Moeti. I'm the producer and business developer for Nyamakop, as Jordan said so lovingly. My name means many gifts, and my presence is a presence. And I'm here to give you some insights on how to become a socially conscious studio. So the real question is, what even is the problem? And I think that when talking about South Africa and South African game development, we need to realize that it is still a small industry and one that will continue to grow, hopefully exponentially. And while we do that, we also want to create a situation where our game studios, some of the content that we make, but particularly the people making the games, are representative of the demographics of our community, of our country. So a quick thing before I really get into like discussing how to be a socially conscious studio, which means like how to ensure that you create a safe working environment for people from various demographics. I just want to clear up some of the language I'm going to be using. So I'm going to be using the term untapped people versus diverse or marginalized people. And one of the few things about, and the reason is that it changes the way we think about untapped people. Marginalization has negative connotations and perpetuates the problem of learned helplessness, where if you're an untapped person, you're conditioned to expect suffering, pain, or discomfort in the way that um, without a way to escape it, right? And this is a lot of experiences that untapped people have. This includes things like being told implicitly that, or explicitly that you're not important, your ideas or experiences are divisive, you not deserve what you have. For example, saying that someone is an affirmative action or diversity hire, or telling women that they slept their way to the top, or telling anyone that they're there to fill a quota versus a person from an untapped group just having talent. It also highlights the potential skill and talent often untapped people have that is overlooked and dismissed, right? And I think it's particularly important if those skills are soft skills. I think that in the gaming community at the moment, we don't place as much value as we ought to on soft skills, and soft skills are a very big part in game development, not just ensuring that your devs are healthy and happy and you create a comfortable and creative and safe work environment, but also in terms of things like getting funding, building relationships with other partners who could help you make your game. We often dismiss those soft skills and kind of feel like if the prototype is good enough, like a publishing deal will kind of just fall into your lap. So the next question is, why are there so few untapped people in game development? And particularly in South Africa, there is a whole host of reasons. Unfortunately, one of them is that we have hostile work environments, which means not, and this is a very important part, it's not that everyone in a studio hates people from untapped groups and is actively cruel to them, but rather due to a lack of exposure to people from untapped groups, they maybe aren't as friendly, may accidentally do problematic things without realizing it, which makes it very uncomfortable for people to work in those spaces. Sometimes the other problem is that they are often the only kind of untapped person in their studio. And what this means is that implicitly and absolutely accidentally or unintentionally, they end up becoming kind of a mouthpiece for all untapped persons of that group, whether it's a woman having to kind of be the mouthpiece for all women, or people of color being the mouthpiece for all people of color, and how we're all supposed to feel about something. It creates a lot of pressure on someone from that untapped group to sort of work in that space and to try and make it a more inclusive and representative space. There's often a lack of proper mentorship, right? I think that mentorship is a vital part of growing any game developer. And oftentimes for untapped people, there isn't quite enough mentorship in terms of not just teaching them how game development works, but rather the important things of learning soft skills, of introducing them to the correct people, of really putting them forward for opportunities, such as doing talks like I do, or being able to go to business development events, or go to conferences and festivals, there's oftentimes not enough mentorship to really help grow and enhance an untapped person's potential and ability within game development. And finally, there is, to a degree, a lack of understanding the experiences that people from untapped groups often go through, not understanding some of the struggles, both emotionally and mentally, that a lot of people from untapped groups go into. So that can make it a very difficult and uncomfortable place for people to work in. And finally, sadly, there is a lack of opportunities, which means that because the industry is currently so small, there isn't a lot of opportunities for people who have studied game design from any group really to get into and be absorbed into the industry. So obviously there's still a lot of work to do on that front as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to now look at things on a couple of levels as to if you want to create, and that's an important thing, it's if you want to create a socially conscious studio that is representative, not just in the art that you make or the makeup of your developers, but also just one that is a general force for good, both in our industry and all over. We're going to have to look at things in two ways, on an individual level and then on a structural level. On an individual level, the question is, what work do you as a human being have to do? And it's going to sound like it's a lot, but I promise it isn't, and it's definitely worth it. The first thing is you need to follow socially conscious people from untapped groups on any platform that you can, on Twitter, on Instagram, on Facebook. There's often a lot of information. There are generally a lot of like really useful and helpful Twitter threads to help understand issues that people from untapped groups go through. And it's usually quite useful and quite helpful to follow socially conscious people. You ought to read books, articles, Twitter threads, really anything you can get your hands on about privilege, inequality, and the effects of marginalization. And, there's also an element of doing the emotional labor of learning without necessarily burdening an untapped person to do the work for you. The next thing is we need to talk about how you shouldn't be defensive. This is a very important thing because I think that with the way that the discourse is going currently, there are lots of implications in terms of like, if you mess up, what does this mean about you as a person? And like, if I'm honest, you're going to mess up. I mess up. We all mess up. We all make mistakes, and that's okay. It doesn't help to be defensive about it, but rather, one, listen. Just hear the other person out. Then two, take a step back and think about what has been said and really try and understand it and be empathetic to the situation that you're in. Like I said, we're all going to make mistakes. We're all going to mess up. In my notes, I used the swear word, but I was told very sternly that this is an all ages program, so no swearing for me. And try to sincerely apologize and not, I'm sorry you were upset, I'm sorry you were offended, or I'm sorry you think you deserve an apology, but rather, very simply, I am sorry I hurt you. Because whether or not you agree with why a person from an untapped group has said something or feels that something you've said may be problematic, it's really easy to just be like, even if I don't agree, I can recognize that you are hurt, and I want you to know that I did not intentionally hurt you. Thirdly, don't feel guilty. Or if you do feel guilty, don't tell the untapped person in question. Seriously, I mean, my note's a bit rude, but your guilt is wasting everyone's time, right? It's not about feeling guilty or making you, or, realize it's not about you being a bad person. Rather, it's about understanding that sometimes we all make mistakes and to try and learn from those mistakes as we go along. By talking about your guilt or your personal feelings, what you end up doing is you remove the focus from the person who was hurt onto you and putting emotional labor on the person who was hurt to make you feel better for the mistake that you made that hurt them. And I think that that's a thing we all need to get out, a habit we all need to get out of, and really understanding that this does not make you a bad person unless you're doing it willfully and actively trying to make people uncomfortable. Then you are a terrible person. But more likely than not, you've simply made a mistake. You're trying to be better. You're trying to be a good person. And being able to acknowledge that is very useful. Next, we're going to talk about things on a structural level. And this is where we get into an idea of a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. Now, what this means is that, like, a growth mindset is where we talk about you believe that people have potential and the ability to grow and change with the right resources and help, versus a fixed mindset where you kind of believe that people are who they are and nothing you can do can help them grow, and they have to kind of be in your studio at their best already, and not giving them and not needing to give them the opportunity to grow or manage them in any way, and kind of just letting them do their own thing. And if they don't succeed, then that's it for them. There's no change. And oftentimes, this is applied, like a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset, is often applied to untapped people differently. What do I mean by that? In general, and I'd like to think accidentally, unconsciously, there is an assumption that someone from an untapped group is who they like, just are who they are, and there isn't that space for them or belief that they can grow and change and become better at the work that they do. We can often see that there are talented, that untapped people can be as talented and sometimes more talented than people in the dominant group. So, for example, if that's straight people or white people or men, are often, so like untapped people can be as talented or more, but struggle in specific ways because of what we experience throughout our lives. And this ties back to the lack of opportunities and some of the examples earlier of the kind of things that are said to untapped people, like you're only here to fill a diversity hire, you're only, if you're a woman, you stepped your way to the top. Those kinds of things can affect us psychologically and make it harder for us to believe in ourselves about what we can and can't do and the kind of potential we have, and whether or not we, quote unquote, deserve to be in a specific position. And so if you want to be a studio that is very inclusive and representative, you have to actively move away from the fixed mindset and into a growth mindset. We have a situation where there are a lot of wildly talented people who may not necessarily have experience in games specifically, but giving them that boost of help and that growth in the beginning just gives you rewards on rewards on rewards. So yeah, again, we're often treated as though our abilities and our skills are fixed versus growth, versus the ability to see growth in others. And so the next action, once you understand all of this, is you start taking actions, right? So, I mean, I'm just giving you a drop in the ocean, well, not really a drop in the ocean, but just some like basic ideas for you to take from there and to turn and to keep sort of learning and growing, and how to actively create a safe space. So when I talk about taking action, I think that we all want people to feel like the environment and the place we work are safe places, and that we want people to feel comfortable. But oftentimes when we talk about creating, and it's a very loaded term, but creating the inclusive, comfortable, and safe spaces, we don't think about the work that it takes. You can't just tell people that you're open to hearing feedback. You have to consistently, in your actions, actively create a safe space, actively create an inclusive and diverse space. And you can do that by taking these actions. The first thing is to take microaggressions seriously. This doesn't mean that the person who committed a microaggression needs to be fired or raked over the coals, or whipped on the back. It just means that you have to be able to take a step back, understand why this microaggression may be harmful, and then do your best to ensure that those kinds of small things don't happen again. Because while it may be for the person committing the microaggression, it might be one small mistake that they didn't think about. But generally, for an untapped person, it is death by 1,000 paper cuts, where, whether someone's mispronounced your name and it is the 15th, 20th time, or someone's accidentally misgendered you and it's the 50th millionth time, or, it's all how these small little things that on their own and out of context aren't that big a deal sort of snowball and become a bigger deal and create an unsafe space. If you see something problematic, say something, especially if a person from an untapped group is not in that space. It's important to really take that action and to, in a very kind and frame, not in a kind and understanding way, say, hey, that thing you said, this is not okay. Have you considered, not thinking that way for X, Y, and Z? And to just do so to create a dialogue that isn't adversarial or aggressive, but rather a discussion to help create more empathy, kindness, and understanding. And this is very vital because to open up to actively grow the strengths of an untapped person and strive to help them in the weaknesses, you need to be able to finally hype them up. You need to be able to ensure that they're not the only person who has to talk out about problematic things. Mentoring is very, very important. You really ought to hype them up, really show untapped people that you can see what they do right and celebrate what they do right. And I don't mean celebrate them doing the bare minimum, right? That's not what we're talking about. But really just being able to focus on the skills and the things that they're good at, and helping them understand and grow and giving them that positive reinforcement that helps them unlearn a lot of the problematic things that we've been told, like how we don't deserve our positions, how we wouldn't be here if it wasn't from whichever group we are from, versus accepting that, hey, people from untapped groups can also be talented and good at what they do. So mentoring is very, very vital. Value and acknowledge soft skills. They are such an important part of our industry. And I think that a lot of the time they are not taken as seriously and they're not understood to have value. And because of the experiences of a lot of untapped people, we necessarily have to build very good and robust soft skills. And honestly, it can do a huge amount of good for your studio. Praise the work of untapped people. This is so important. And finally, provide opportunities and actively give tips on how to succeed. But not patronizingly, not very basic things, but really on the granular things, and thinking about how were you able to build connections in the industry? How were you able to do specific kinds of work? And how can you take that knowledge and the experience that you have and have learned and pass that on to untapped people so that they are prepared for the environment, they're prepared for the work, and they can really do the best that they can. This is not just about doing the right thing, although we ought to do the right thing because it's the right thing to do. But there is an immense value, and there has been a lot of evidence that having people from diverse backgrounds and having a representative studio creates a more creative space because you see things from various perspectives and angles, and you're opening yourself up to being welcomed by larger parts of the audience that already exist in game development, that already exists in the gaming sphere. An important thing to do is please avoid tokenism. Please, I beg of you. It is incredibly damaged, and it boils down the untapped person to their identity and not their skills. And what that means is it makes the untapped person, like I said earlier, the woman of, the spokesperson for women, the spokesperson for queer people, the spokesperson for, people of color. And what that does is it strips untapped people of their individuality. It stops us from being complex, interesting people and sort of just makes us the Black person, the woman, the queer person. And it's really damaging to their skills. And it becomes very easy to not see their skills if you just, see their race or their gender. It puts a lot of pressure on the untapped, like I said, to be a representative for their entire demographic. And to be honest, in a lot of these spaces where you're the only untapped person, it feels like we have 5 times a year to speak out about problematic things. And then you kind of just have to let other problematic things slide, because if you don't, it kind of puts you as though it's you versus everyone else in the studio. It's deeply uncomfortable, and it turns you into kind of the Debbie Downer. It's exhausting, and it takes energy that could be better spent on doing the work we are paid to do and growing the game development and putting all of that creative and emotional energy into the work that we want to do and the reason we are at the studio. Yeah, and it's it is so exhausting to have the same conversation over and over again. And to be honest, it makes the work environment incredibly unsafe. So it's really not a good way to go. In conclusion, ultimately, even with these steps that I've mentioned, and I mean, one of the things I haven't mentioned, but I'll just say now is if you have the ability to, I would recommend, even if you're just a manager or an owner and you don't want to be a socially conscious studio, I would highly recommend therapy. Therapy is a great place to learn good, healthy managerial skills and soft skills that help create a comfortable, creative environment for the people who work for you, whether or not they're untapped groups or not. And like sort of in conclusion, this is, and I will admit, quite difficult, but it is deeply rewarding. It's not just the ethical and moral thing to do, but because we know, and like I said before, multiple studies have shown how beneficial it is for a company to have different viewpoints and ideas. And honestly, and moreover, the tide is turning. I think that if you want to create a socially conscious studio, it is because you understand that people are hungry for authentic stories told from different perspectives. And you understand that the world we are living in is changing. The concept of who is a gamer, the demographics of who plays video games is changing. And you want to be able to cater to those various perspectives and various groups. Because if you don't, that's just a lot of money that's sitting on the table, like that you're not getting, that you could be getting for your studio. I mean, I know there's a study that proves that 77% of African Americans are video gamers, and yet we still live in a world that does not actually cater to them, which is atrocious. Anyway, but yeah, so we constantly talk about creating a safe working environment and wanting the people there to feel safe, and we want to be safe people that others can come and talk to. But to be honest, untapped people are distrustful because we have heard that time and time again, and we've been let down. But if you are open to doing the work, I think it'll create a better space. And prepared to not get a cookie for it. Because really it's just be like, the talk is basically how to be a decent human being if you want to create a representative studio in a diverse place. And finally, you don't want to get canceled on Twitter. It's a lot of work. It's so much drama. It's not worth it. So just doing the work will be a lot easier. I've been Dean Paul. Thank you so much. I think I went over time.